Here are 25 players and 8 defenses to consider adding to your Week 8 fantasy football roster, either fresh off the Week 8 waiver wire or even after waivers clear. I got you covered right here on episode 44 of Inside the 20 by Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. What is up, my friend? It's Mikey Henninger from Basement Brewed Fantasy Football, and today we're going to walk through some of the hot names for you to target on the Week 8 waiver wire. Every week I put together a free waiver wire cheat sheet for my subscribers, and today we're not going to have time to get to all 25 names that are on the Week 8 list, but like I said, the list is completely free and you can grab yours using the link that we left for you in the show notes. Now, 2 really quick things to note before we dive in. Number 1, I'm recording this before kickoff of the 2 Monday night football games tonight. The Ravens and Buccaneers haven't played yet, and the Chargers and Cardinals have not played yet. So keep that in mind as you're listening to today's episode, but don't worry, I do update the waiver wire cheat sheet if anything significant happens in tonight's games. Number 2, most players on the list and most players that we're going to talk about today are rostered in around or less than 50% of fantasy football leagues. Now, obviously, keep your own leagues, keep your own team, keep your own settings, keep your own rosters, keep all of those things in mind when you're making some of these decisions moving forward. But without further ado, let's dig into some of the hot names to target on the Week 8 waiver wire. Are you a software wizard? A code ninja? A Forgemaster? Or maybe even just a mad scientist? Then come build your career ladder with Infinity Labs, an award-winning technology company, best place to work, and business of the year with best-in-class benefits and compensation. Visit i-labs.tech. That's i-labs.tech today, where you can learn more about Infinity Labs, our expanding national presence, and why the status quo has no hold on us. Brandon Ayuk suffered a season-ending knee injury, creating a pretty massive gap in the 49ers offense. Now, we've seen Juwan Jennings have success in a full-time role in the 49ers offense as recently as this year, just a few weeks ago, but he's also dealing with a hip injury of his own, and 31st overall pick Ricky Pearsall waits in the wings and waits to make his mark on the 2024 season for the San Francisco 49ers. Both Juwan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall are both worthy of adding to your bench after waivers clear on Wednesday morning. Deshaun Watson suffered a season-ending Achilles injury in Week 7, once again thrusting Jameis Winston back into a starting quarterback role in the NFL. Now, in 78 career NFL games where Jameis Winston threw at least 20 passes, he's averaging a very fantasy-friendly 17.2 fantasy points per game. He scored 15 or more fantasy points in 44 of those 78 games, or about 56% of the time. And we know he actually has a pretty massive ceiling when things just so happen to break right for Jameis Winston, scoring 30 or more fantasy points in 4 of those 78 games. So he's not doing it frequently, only about 5% of the time, but that ceiling does exist, including a career high of 34.7 fantasy points back in Week 14 of 2019 against the Indianapolis Colts. He's a more than serviceable plug-and-play quarterback moving forward if you're in a 2-quarterback or in your Superflex leagues. Speaking of the Cleveland Browns, when Amari Cooper was traded to the Buffalo Bills, we widely expected a small uptick in production from Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore, and David Njoku. But it turns out the biggest beneficiary of Amari Cooper going to Buffalo is none other than 2023 third-round pick from Tennessee, Cedric Tillman. Tillman played 82% of the Browns' offensive snaps and led all wide receivers, not just Browns wide receivers, but all wide receivers in Week 7 targets with 12. He caught 8 of them for 81 scoreless yards, and now moving forward, Tillman actually has a really strong matchup and a likely pass-heavy game script against the Baltimore Ravens in Week 8. And if there's anything we've learned about Jameis Winston over the years, it's that he's definitely willing to YOLO ball it and force-feed his wide receivers. Cedric Tillman definitely deserves a spot on fantasy football rosters in Week 8. Romeo Doubs head-scratchingly remains available in 56% of fantasy football leagues despite having 7 or more targets in 3 of the 4 games that he's played with Jordan Love this year, including Week 7 where he set season highs in targets with 10, catches with 8, and yards with 94. Moving forward for the next 2 weeks, Romeo Doubs has delicious matchups and some potentially high-scoring games against the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Detroit Lions in Weeks 8 and 9. He definitely deserves to be rostered in Week 8 more than he has been up to this point. Despite Zamir White returning to the lineup in Week 7, Alexander Mattison handled a whopping 26 touches in Week 7, including 3 targets and 3 catches for 123 scoreless scrimmage yards, compared to just 4 touches for Zamir White. Now, Madison has some brutal matchups and game script coming up against the Kansas City Chiefs and the Cincinnati Bengals before their Week 10 bye week, but still, Alexander Mattison should not be available in 46% of fantasy football leagues, yet here we are. We have our Discord server, which is an online community. It's an online army of 175 plus other fantasy football players helping each other dominate the fantasy football season. It's also where I spend 100% of my time hanging out 24/7, 365. It's where I share exclusive insights, golden fantasy football nuggets, the very second I find them. So if you want to come hang out with me, come hang out with us. All you got to do is go over to Basement Brood Fantasy Football's Patreon channel, which we'll leave a link for you in the show notes below. Tyler Lockett is a guy who's available in 43% of fantasy football leagues, and if he just so happens to be available in your league, he's definitely worth a look on the Week 8 waiver wire. Now, DK Metcalf suffered a knee injury in Week 7, one that Dr. Deepak Jonah suggested on Twitter could keep DK Metcalf out of the next 2 games before the Seahawks get into their Week 10 bye. And those next 2 games, by the way, just so happen to be possible shootouts and pass-heavy game scripts against the Buffalo Bills and the Los Angeles Rams. Now, Tyler Lockett himself is already plenty involved in the Seahawks offense. He has 6 or more targets in 6 of 7 games this year, even with DK Metcalf in the lineup. And now with DK Metcalf and 9 targets per game potentially up for grabs, Tyler Lockett's definitely worth a look on the Week 8 waiver wire if he just so happens to be available in your league. Hunter Henry caught 8 of 9 targets for 92 scoreless yards in Week 7, bringing him to 14 targets, 11 catches, 133 yards, and 1 touchdown in 2 games that he's played with rookie quarterback Drake May. He's definitely turning out to look like something of a safety blanket for the rookie quarterback, bringing him into streamer viability as a option in PPR leagues. If you're in a pinch and you're looking for help at tight end, Hunter Henry could help you out in the coming weeks. Broncos 4th round rookie Troy Franklin played 65% of the offensive snaps in Week 6 and then 51% of the offensive snaps in Week 7, garnering 9 targets and catching 7 of them for 81 yards and 1 touchdown in the last 2 weeks combined. He's beginning to emerge as a top option for an improving Bo Nix and improving Broncos passing attack, and it's fair to wonder if he's just at the beginning of a potential hot stretch as the Broncos, as Bo Nix, and as Troy Franklin himself continues to improve. He might not be a name that you're adding to your bench quite yet, but he's definitely a name should be at the top of your watch list at absolute worst. Speaking of rookie pass catchers to keep an eye on, rookie pass catchers that just might be at the beginning of a hot stretch, take a quick look at Panthers tight end Jatavian Sanders. He has 5 or more targets in each of the last 3 games, totaling 18 targets, 14 catches, and 123 scoreless yards over the last 3 games combined, including, by the way, a season/career high 6 catches for 61 yards and 12.1 PPR points right here in Week 7. Again, he might not be the name that you're adding off the waiver wire. Maybe you're not even adding him after waivers clear, but he's definitely creeping onto the radar as a name you need to keep an eye on, especially at fantasy football's weakest position in tight end. Now, when it comes to setting your fantasy football lineups this week, give the heat map a try. If you're not familiar with the heat map, it offers contextual analysis for every fantasy relevant player in every game, every single week, all to help you conquer even the most impossible start-sit decisions, identify clutch streamers that you can plug and play off waivers when you're in a pinch, and ultimately set week-wrecking DFS and fantasy football lineups week in and week out. It takes you behind the curtain to show you how elite fantasy football players make smart lineup, DFS, and even betting decisions on every relevant player every single week. This is the resource that led to me quitting my corporate career and starting my own company after it went viral on Reddit, and now it's yours. 30 plus hours of weekly fantasy football research that's suddenly accessible to you on demand in an easy to use spreadsheet format. It puts the power in your hands and instantly makes you a smarter fantasy football player. Head on over to my Patreon or just use the link that I left for you in the show notes to get just this week's heat map for just $4.99, or you can get the remainder of the season of heat maps all the way through the Super Bowl for just $2.79 per heat map. That's going to be all for today's episode. Come back every Friday at noon Central, where I go live right here on the Basement Brood Fantasy Football YouTube channel, and I answer as many questions as I possibly can about the upcoming week of fantasy football. Like I said, that heat map takes me 30 plus hours to create every single week. You might as well tune in on Friday at noon to take advantage of all that wisdom that's just swimming around my head. The event already exists on the Basement Brood Fantasy Football YouTube channel, so you can go ahead and click that notify me button so that you don't miss it. And while you're there, be sure to click the subscribe button on the Basement Brood Fantasy Football YouTube channel. I will see you on the fantasy football field. Cheers. This brew's for you.